Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan and today we're going to step away from discussion about the DLC itself and rather talk about the lore attached to said DLC. You see, Shadows of Change does have an FLC, and this is a legendary hero known as Aekold Helbrass, a champion of Tzeentch, and a rather interesting one at that, a former member of a knightly order of the Empire who fell to corruption and now serves the Changer of the Ways in his own unique way. You see, Aekold Helbrass is something very different to what you can expect from most servants of Tzeentch, mortal that is, as the majority of them will be very in tune with the winds of magic, being able to be expert spellcasters in one way, shape or form. Whereas Aekold is an expert swordsman, a champion fighter, and some would even argue that Aekold is one of the best swordsmen, if not the best, to have ever walked the Warhammer fantasy world. Obviously this can be disputed depending on who is actually telling this tale, but he's an interesting character nonetheless, with quite impressive amount of lore, especially for Warhammer Fantasy. So what we're going to do right now is go into the Liber Chaotica, one of the most impressive books ever released by Games Workshop, and read over what we actually know of this character. There was a time many years ago when that nightmare of folklore, Aekold Helbrass, was the respected son of a noble household, living in his father's mansion house in Altdorf. Back then, Aekold had everything a young man of the Empire could possibly want: wealth, power, a beautiful fiancée, and a commission with the Templar Order of the Jade Griffin. But these good things were not to last. His problem started when he joined what he thought to be a harmless secret society calling itself the Brethren of the Golden Eagle. He had understood little of the principles behind the Brethren's complex rites, but they had shared a common goal: they wanted to change the world. Aekold had always believed that there had to be something more to existence than the petty bickering and selfish politics of city life, despite the fact that he had found little evidence of that something more in all his 26 years of living. In his quest for a better way, Aekold embraced the Empire State religion with a passion, seeking to devote his life to the service of the Heldenhammer. But over time, he found even the teachings of Sigmar's Holy Church lacking, in that they promised little but expected much. They taught that there would be no cessation to the pain and the pettiness of this life, and even after death there could be no guarantee of peace or an afterlife, so grave were the horrors that beset mankind. It seemed that the lives of men were doomed to be spent in the pursuit of petty things for an uncertain reward. Day and night Aekold prayed to Sigmar, begging the first emperor to show him how he could change the world for better, to make a difference. But no answer came. Then, as Aekold's hopes of ever finding the knowledge he sought had begun to fade, a drinking friend introduced him to the Brethren of the Golden Eagle. Aekold saw at once that this is what he had been looking for all his life. The Brethren were dedicated to the notion of changing the world, and their every word and endeavor stretched towards this end. Stopping for a moment here, a common misconception is that every Chaos Warrior that has fallen to Chaos has always been inherently evil, and this is the perfect example as to why it's not always the case. Sometimes people are trying to find a way to make the world a better place, and they're trying to find answers. It's very easy for chaos to corrupt you even if you have good intentions. We're at a different place and a different time, and Aekold had not met with the Brethren of the Golden Eagle. He would have likely not fallen to chaos whatsoever, possibly even rising through the ranks, marrying his fiancée, and becoming the chapter master of the Knights of the Jade Griffin. However, we do know that Tzeentch did have plans for this champion, so maybe his fate was sealed directly, no matter how hard he tried to fight against it, as we've seen with other characters such as Archaon the Everchosen. But let's continue. The Brethren's preacher was an intelligent and urbane man by the name of Melik Rosenkrantz. He was a magus of considerable skill and power, easily a rival to the initiates of the colleges of magic, able to change base metals into gold, heal wounds with a word, and change animals into new forms. Here was a man that Aekold could follow. The young knight was certain his prayers had finally been answered. The rituals of the Brethren called upon a great Lord of Change, beseeching this divine being's aid so that improvements might be found in this world and in this life, rather than in the uncertainty of the next. Aekold's intelligence and powerful personality soon earned him a position in the Brethren's most secretive third circle, and before long he had been initiated into the many secrets of the Coven. Then, one night, the Templars of Sigmar raided his cult's hidden shrine. Aekold only narrowly escaped their clutches, but under the interrogation of the witch hunter captain himself, one of Aekold's fellow acolytes broke and revealed the names of all the members of the Coven, Aekold amongst them. Aekold's commission in the Order of the Jade Griffin was revoked, and his fellow knights came to arrest him and bring him before the authorities of Sigmar. Aekold begged them to listen to him, but they cared nothing for his excuses. 3 of them died under Aekold's sword, and the other 2 were so badly wounded that they would never fight again. No matter what could be said about him, no one could doubt that Aekold was one of the most talented swordsmen of his order. Aekold fled through the streets of the Empire's capital, pursued by his former friends, the Town Watch, and the feared Templars of Sigmar. In his desperation, Aekold sought refuge at the house of his betrothed, Lady Joanna von Lieber. But even she had barred her windows against him. He tried to explain the unjustness of the assumption made against him and why he had been declared an outlaw, but the lady did not want to hear him. She declared that she did not ever want to see him again, accusing him of bringing disrepute upon her family and their standing in society. Aekold knew then that, but for Validus, his warhorse, he was truly alone. With little else to do, Aekold headed for the river gate. Without pause or leave, the once knight rode down the guards and took the north road at a heedless gallop. Before long, Aekold had left the Reichland's borders far behind him, but Sigmar's witch hunters were always close at hand. Forced to live like a beast of the wild, Aekold slept in the darkness, in the deep forests, and travelled by night to avoid the eyes of the curious. His food he stole or bought from roadside farms, and he avoided every town and toll gate, all while the humiliation of his fall from grace made his blood run hot. So before we jump into the other stuff, it's kind of important to note that he's moving, and you can see he's going all the way to Ostland and even further than that, because if you're suspected, let alone confirmed to be a Chaos Worshipper, yeah, you're going to be hunted down pretty much to the ends of the earth. Not only will witch hunters keep following you, but they'll send agents around. You're not going to be safe anywhere with the Empire, no matter how well you can hide. There's always going to be people on your tail. It's a risk that you take when falling to chaos, and it's something quite interesting to note considering the large amount of chaos cults and splinter cults within the Empire. There's actually a lot of different chaos worshippers hidden in plain sight, people that most Imperials, most guardsmen there might even interact with and have no idea. But let's continue. At the borders of Ostland, one of Sigmar's Templars finally caught up with him, and a crossbow bolt intended for Aekold's heart only narrowly missed, taking his life. Only by throwing his great Swayhander, an unthinkable deed for a knight, did he manage to kill the witch hunter before one of his crossbow bolts could find its mark. The two-handed sword had struck his foe squarely in the chest, and Aekold had barely managed to recover from the attack before the ferocious hunting dogs of the Count of Ostland appeared, snapping at his heels. Perhaps fate had been unkind to Aekold. After all, the young man had only sought to escape the monotony of his jaded and dull existence as a young nobleman of the Empire. All around him, he had seen the decadence of the imperial capital, the filthy streets, and the hopeless mobs of the poor, begging and scraping out a miserable existence in the hovels and disease-ridden slums. Again, important to note that Aekold always had the best intentions, despite the fact that the Empire can be considered the good guys in a sense in Warhammer Fantasy. It's still very corrupt. The churches don't care about the poor populace. People like Karl Franz, for example, would be aware of this matter and would not care enough to actually fix it, because such is the order of things. At least that's how Aekold sees it, and many others who do end up falling to chaos within the Empire. Aekold wanted to change everything, to begin anew, start afresh to cast down the old, corrupt society and be part of building something new, something better. But this was not to be. His life was in ruins, his father had disowned him, and his friends turned against him. He had been driven beyond the borders of Kislev to the very edge of the civilized world, fleeing for his life and with a price on his head. All he had left were his weapons, his strong sword arm, and his will to survive. They would have to be enough. He was about to enter the Troll country, and no one would dare follow him there. Aekold travelled northwards for 7 days before he encountered any resistance. He had seen the groups of misshapen creatures in the shadows of the tree line or upon the distant horizons, but they never sought to approach him. They seemed content to watch. Why, Aekold did not know, but until they became a threat, he decided to pay them no mind. As Aekold travelled onward, the trees grew thinner and thinner, and the land grew ever rockier. After a time, he came across a great monolith, a standing stone carved as if by some titanic hand. It was inscribed with sigils and runes that seemed to glow in the gathering darkness. Though he could not say why, Aekold knew that the carved slab was of vital importance to him. He had to know what was written on the monolith, even if it would cost him his soul. But the monolith was not unguarded. Out of the crude shrine that stood next to the carved pillar, a huge creature emerged. The earth shook under its great cloven hoofs, and gigantic muscles writhed under its thick hide. Huge horns spiraled above a bovine head, and yet the creature's body was humanoid, though massive like that of an ogre. In its hands, the bull creature carried an axe that Aekold reckoned must have weighed almost as much as he did. Aekold recognized the creature from the grimoires of the Brethren. This was a Minotaur, a gigantic blasphemy against nature, a cross between a mighty bull and a giant man. Yet, despite its brutal appearance, intelligence gleamed in the creature's bloodshot eyes. The low cunning of an animal combined with some of the sense of a man. Forcing his voice to stay calm, Aekold told the creature of his desire and intention to study the carvings on the monolith. In coarse and barely recognizable Reichspiel, the Minotaur replied that only the Chosen One could find the path, and that all those who could not change must perish. Then bellowing a battle cry, the Minotaur lifted its gigantic axe and charged. Aekold slammed down his visor and spurred Validus to a gallop. They thundered towards each other, man and beast, one screaming the battle cry of an imperial knight, the other bellowing and snarling in the dark tongue of chaos. So before we continue here, it is important to note that yes, the Beastmen are kinda capable of speaking Reichspiel and other common tongue languages. It's extremely rare. Usually they'll have to be blessed by the Chaos Gods in a way to be able to do so. I know some people would have questions about that, but the grand majority, and I mean like 99.9% of the Beastmen, would likely only speak the Dark Tongue of Chaos and not any other languages, even if they were, for example, a Gave, or someone who had mutated later in life to become a Gore or an Ungore. It's possible that they would remember their former life and their former tongue, but very, very rare. They struck. Aekold's lance pierced the Minotaur's left shoulder, its wooden haft shattering with the force of the impact. Rearing upwards, Validus lashed out with both iron-shoot hooves and crashed down against the Minotaur's skull. But the creature's gigantic axe had just as great a reach as Aekold's lance, and its swipe was blindingly fast. It hit Aekold's ray shield, but the tremendous force of the blow ripped it from its hands, leaving his left arm numb. The Minotaur swung again with its free hand, and its massive fist, perhaps twice the size of Aekold's head, smashed the knight from his saddle. Aekold crashed to the ground, the air driven from his lungs by the force of the impact. With a ferocious roar, the Minotaur tore the steel tip of the lance from its shoulder and threw it to the ground. Thick blood oozed from its wound, but the creature seemed not to notice. With blood-red eyes and crimson foam pouring from its mouth, the creature bellowed once more. All vestiges of sanity had disappeared from its face. It rushed towards the fallen knight, swinging its axe in a huge arc. Its axe struck the stone where Aekold's head had been but a heartbeat before, and such was the force of the blow that the blade of the axe cracked, and the haft snapped into like a dry twig. Aekold regained his footing and scrambled towards Validus. He drew his sword from its scabbard, hanging from the horse's saddle, but the Minotaur had been just as quick. Two mighty arms closed around Aekold's chest, squeezing him until his armor creaked as he was lifted above the head of the Minotaur. Though his ribs threatened to break and his strength faded, Aekold swung his blade downwards. It struck the Minotaur in the neck, cutting muscles, severing tendons and sinew, and splintering the bones beneath. A cry of fury and pain cut the air. As the Minotaur toppled forward, Aekold hit the ground alongside it. The world seemed to spin and go dark. When Aekold woke, the Minotaur was nowhere to be seen. Groaning with agony, Aekold rose to his feet and staggered across to the monolith. Despite the pain, Aekold felt driven to see the carvings immediately, as if forced to by some unseen hand. He had looked upon the swirling designs and jagged runes that covered the monolith's surface. Aekold realized that they formed a picture. Stepping back, Aekold began to make out the shape of a knight with the device of a rampant griffin on his shield, the same device on Aekold's own shield. The former knight studied the ancient carvings, and while he was no expert, he was sure that, judging by the wear of the rock, they had to have been several centuries old, and yet, undeniably, the knight carved on the stone was supposed to be him. A chill ran down Aekold's spine. He turned his back on the monolith. Days passed and Aekold rode further north. Here was a place unfit for mortal men. Only those who had pledged themselves to darkness could travel safely, yet Aekold sensed that he could still choose his path, as if he stood at the very edge of sanity, but had not yet crossed to the madness beyond. He knew that this was his very last chance to turn back and rejoin civilization. He could ride to Talia or the lands of the Border Princes and offer his services as a freelance to one of the countless mercenary bands of the Old World. He was strong and fast and well versed in tactics and strategy. With little luck, he could quickly win fame and fortune and soon lead a mercenary contingent of his own. And yes, this is something that is very possible. He could still turn back. He could literally just live his life out as a mercenary. However, Tzeentch has already kind of marked him in a sense. So even if he turned back and went to Talia or whatever and decided to live his life as a mercenary, Chaos Demons could still try to influence him. That is, if Tzeentch still found some sort of promise in Aekold. Should he have gone to the lands of the Border Princes and become a mercenary, it's very possible that the change of ways could have decided, yeah, he's not worth dealing with, or he'll have to do his own thing until he proves himself useful once again. Obviously, we'll never know, as this never came to pass. But let's continue. For a long while, Aekold held Validus in place, and then, making up his mind, spurred the horse onwards, to the north and darkness. It might have been his imagination, but mocking laughter seemed to whisper upon the cold wind as he rode on. So stopping once again, that very moment, the moment he decided to ride on northward, he damned himself. There's literally no way back from there. He didn't have to pick up a magical artifact. He didn't have to pledge himself to Tzeentch. Already, he was considered damned. Let's continue. Day and night lost all meaning. The eternal darkness of the Chaos Wastes was lit only by the strange lights emanating from the far north. Each time Aekold blinked his eyes, the landscape appeared to have subtly changed. When he tried to focus his eyes on any landmarks, it seemed to almost flee from his vision, and things he thought would take minutes to reach escaped even further into the distance, no matter how hard he galloped towards them. Water now could not quench his thirst. He yearned for something of more substance, something he could not yet name. Neither did he feel the need to sleep anymore. He felt wide awake, and his senses were sharper than he had ever dreamed possible. He no longer felt hunger. He felt strong, healthy, and fast, stronger and faster than he had ever been before. His warhorse, Validus, had also changed. Its teeth had grown sharp, and it no longer shied back with fear when one of the foul creatures from those endless plains approached. Its eyes glowed red in the eternal darkness of the Chaos Wastes, and its hide had become darker and tough as leather. Aekold noticed that Validus's tongue was now as rough as sandpaper and had grown long and forked. The steed no longer brushed its nose against Aekold's face, but always stood silent and unmoving when they were not riding. The unearthly wind of the wastes was full of sounds, strange voices that whispered to Aekold about all his noble and evil deeds, as if warring for his attention, perhaps even his soul. But one voice was stronger, and it drowned out all the others. Be strong, it would say. Only the strong are welcome. So here is something quite interesting. You see, Aekold is moving and mutating, same as his horse. All the Chaos Gods are vying for his attention right now. Tzeentch has not yet claimed Aekold, so Right now, Tzeentch, Nurgle, and Khorne are looking at him going, this is a champion. He's not claimed. He could be mine. He could lead my forces. So every deity right now, possibly even the minor chaos deities that we very, very rarely hear about, are trying to call out to him. But let's continue. When one day Aekold cried back to the sibilant voice that he was strong and that he feared nothing, mocking laughter returned in an answer. Then the voice whispered to him once more. Then show me, gallant knight, prove to me your courage. On the horizon, a gigantic shape loomed from the darkness. It was a gateway that stood on the top of a long fleet of steps. It was a titanic altar, perhaps erected by the giants of ancient times when the world was young and the gods of chaos first turned their eyes upon it. In the sky above the gateway flames danced, forming the shapes of eldritch runes, not unlike the ones Aekold had seen on the grimoires at the Temple of Sigmar, hidden and locked away from ordinary folk. But as a part of his training, Aekold had learned to decipher them, and so read aloud the messages written in the sky. Shamilna, Tzeentch, Adte, Vosden, Taxif. Then Aekold dismounted and started to climb up the stairs. On and on he climbed higher and higher until the air grew thin and cold and clouds whirled far below him. Despite his heavy armor, Aekold felt no fatigue. At the top of the stairway, Aekold gazed around him. He had come to the end of his journey. The gateway before him seemed to be made out of polished silver, reflecting the grim darkness and dancing lights of the Chaos Wastes. Aekold stood before the portal and stared at his mirror image. Looking back at him was a young, handsome Templar in burnished armor, holding a shining sword with a jade griffin set on its pommel. This was what Aekold could have been, something he had now lost for all eternity. The mirror image spoke. I am the guardian. I am the defender of humanity. You are an abomination. With that, the reflection stepped out of the portal with its sword raised in a knight's salute, and then it charged. So swift was the attack that Aekold barely had time to defend himself. From the first blow, Aekold knew that his life was at stake. Never before had he met a man who could match him in a sword fight, but this warrior from beyond the mirror gate was just as fast, strong, and skilled as he was. They slashed and struck, weaving, dodging, and parrying as they circled each other warily. Now and then one of them would launch an attack with blistering speed, only to be parried by equal skill. Aekold was struck suddenly by the pointlessness of it all. Why did he struggle so much to defend himself when he had nothing left to defend? Instead of giving in, Aekold smiled, brought up his sword, and charged. Both men struck. The Templar's sword sliced through Aekold's armor, cutting deep into his ribs, but Aekold's sword took the Templar's head from his shoulders. As the body of the White Templar fell, blood gushing from the stump of his neck, Aekold sank to his knees, his own lifeblood oozing through the gaps in his armor. He was dying and he knew it. Yet he had come so far and seen so much. Too much to let it all end in that moment. Agonizingly slowly, Aekold began to crawl back to the portal, leaving a trail of blood behind him. Now the silver of the mirror showed no reflection, only the multicolored flames of the Chaos Wastes colored in its surface. Aekold touched the mirror's surface. He knew that his own death waited for him on the other side of it. Yet he still had to continue. As the world seemed to spin around him, Aekold heard the sibilant voice again, only now it seemed to echo all around him. The way lies beyond this portal, yet only the chosen one may enter. Are you he? For one final time, Aekold felt a pang of guilt. For one last time, he longed for his former life. But what had he to go back to? His past life was as dead to him as the headless Templar that lay behind him. Finally, Aekold pushed against the surface of the mirror portal. A searing pain, like lances of pure white fire, ripped through him. Aekold screamed in agony as he felt talons, hotter than hellfire, colder than the void, tearing him apart, separating flesh from bone, raking his very soul and obliterating whatever was left of his sanity. Then all sense and feeling left him. Aekold, the son of Graf of the Reichland, was gone. The newly born champion of Tzeentch, standing before the mirror portal, turned around to study his new form. The pale reflection in the mirror showed a face quite unlike the young knight who had left Aekold all those months ago. 2 eyes glittering like multifaceted gems and burning within a balefire stared back at him. His armor was covered in twisting runes that glowed in the flickering darkness of the Chaos Wasteland. His sword gleamed with blue light and seemed to moan as he moved it, its shape changing with each motion. Aekold began to laugh. He raised his sword, lifting it in challenge to humanity and all things he had once held dear. His laughter turned to a scream of hatred and vengeance. "I will return," he cried, "for now I know the truth." Aekold's fall is actually quite sad when you think about it. He's a champion of the Empire who wished to do better. He wanted the people to be safe, not to suffer, not to be poor anymore. But this shows the corrupting power of chaos, where passion and being virtuous will not protect you from the corrupting nature of the ruinous powers, and perhaps, possibly even elevate the speed at which you could fall. Too many good intentions, and the good intentions can be lost. We've seen that in our own real history, where people will fight under any cause, and yet still be destructive, still be what we could consider evil. It's further proof of this when a lot of these champions, the ones that we fear in general, leading hordes of chaos, end up being former members of their own society, former priests, wizards, architects. Anyone can fall. And I believe this is what makes the Chaos Champions so interesting. Rather than just those born into tribes being elevated from there, there's also simple heroes that have fallen. And it adds a lot more to it. It shows that the Warhammer Fantasy world is extremely depressing. And even more so when the champion itself still bears a mark of what he used to be. When you could run this character way back in 5th edition, Aekold had a very interesting entry. Aekold Helbrass, champion of Tzeentch, bears a most unusual gift. The gift that is known as the Breath of Life. Where Aekold walks, the grass springs green and meadow flowers blossom. When he walks upon desert sands and stony rocks, the land bursts into life as he passes. Any living thing he touches springs into new and vigorous growth. The long dead wood of doors and staves take root upon his touch. His touch can restore to health creatures that are upon the threshold of death, for such is the power of the Breath of Life. His touch is as indiscriminate as it is potent. Behind him, he leaves a trail of new life, and everything he touches is affected. While life-giving is the gift of Aekold, he slays his opponents without pity or care for their life, for he knows all life is but an endless dance of change, dictated by Tzeentch, the Master of Fate. This is once again proving how ironic Tzeentch can be in blessings. While Aekold is a warrior of destruction, able to decimate armies, lead champions into battle, and we've seen it happen in the lore, most specifically during the End Times, which is stuff that got more fleshed out for Helbrass himself, where he led assaults of Kislev and a lot of areas too. He can also heal. He can bring in a mockery of what is natural magic, the breath of life, the lore of life itself, paired with his famed Windblade, which is a great double-banded broadsword granted to him by his master Tzeentch. He is able to move across the battlefield at incredible speeds as the sword acts as a conduit of his power. We know already that Aekold was a swordsman like no other, but with this Windblade, he is able to be even much more so than he was before. Where again, this does make Aekold one of the most unique of the champions of Tzeentch, focusing more on destruction in terms of pure ferocity in battle, but also healing the land around, making a mockery of the gods who seek to create nature. Aekold knows what his master sent him out to do, and he does just that. He is loyal, as any other Chaos Champion would be, to their patron deity, wishing to only change the world. And I honestly believe that Aekold still thinks that serving Tzeentch is going to be the way to change the world for the better of the world itself. With that being said, what do you think about Aekold Helbrass? This is a character that will be joining the Total War Warhammer franchise as a legendary hero. I know some people were expecting him to be a lord, but this means that he is able to be recruited by a multitude of different Chaos factions, and will likely serve to help out the Changeling, who would still be good at melee combat, but more so Kairos, who needs a little bit of extra physical help. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. This is a character that I very much enjoy. I've got the original model. I've painted him in a very multitude of different colors, as most people see him. Most illustrations back in the day was kind of rainbow styled, and it made him stand out from all other Chaos Lords, that's for sure. Creative Assembly obviously brought him down a little bit to make him more Tzeentchian style rather than just more unique, but I still think he looks very, very cool. But yeah, let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and let's start a bit of a discussion. Until then, have a good day, my friends, and I'll see you all again very, very soon.